From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefanía Bravo, and this is From the South. The foreign ministers of Russia and Cuba have met in Moscow to discuss the U.S. blockade on the island and the political situation in Venezuela. The meeting also focused on commercial and economic agreements. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, said his country will continue supporting Cuba in the fight against the blockade. His counterpart, Bruno Rodriguez, said Cuba is supporting the talks between the Venezuelan government and opposition that are set to restart in Norway.
Cuba's history has shown that impositions regarding international law have not worked. We, as our Cuban brothers, think that the illegal sanctions on the island are unacceptable, and we reaffirm that we do not support the economic, commercial, and financial blockade pushed by the United States. We will continue supporting the island on their fight to end the blockade. We are joining several countries in the world that are demanding the blockade to end. The actions taken by Washington against Venezuela are aimed at ignoring the free will of Latin America and the Caribbean. The U.S. government is doing all it can to confront people of different ideologies, even through a military conflict.
And Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez highlighted the role of Russia demanding peace and multilateralism.
I want to reaffirm that relations between Russia and Cuba are excellent. Our ties are based on our history and are of priority for both governments. We based our ties in the friendship between our peoples. Russia and Cuba agree that peace is key to resolving important issues on the international agenda. My country has great appreciation for Russia and its role in striving for peace and in the defense of multilateralism.
Our correspondent Hansel Oro has more details on this meeting.
Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov held a meeting with his Cuban counterpart Bruno Rodriguez. Both rejected the aggressive policy of the U.S. against Cuba, especially the economic and financial blockade imposed on the island, and expressed their joint goal to expand their economic and commercial relations. Lavrov called for dialogue between Venezuela's government and the opposition. On his part, Rodriguez said he is grateful for Russia's defense of multilateralism, which the U.S. has attempted to block. The two foreign ministers held a meeting in Brussels last Friday with the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Federica Mogherini, calling for all the European countries to stand against the sanctions imposed by the U.S. in the Latin American region.
We thank Hansel for that report. Bolivia has assumed the pro-temporary presidency of the Andean Community of Nations bloc for a period of 1 year. The handover of the presidency from Peru to Bolivia was done on Sunday at the CAN summit held in Lima. It was attended by the presidents and foreign ministers of Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru. Peru's President Martín Vizcarra urged the bloc to take decisive action to combat corruption and climate change.
Together we have seen that we have a new danger that is affecting our countries, which is corruption. Corruption which does not recognize borders, and as a result, if we want to fight it adequately, we must also articulate common strategies. We are countries that have in the global framework the greatest vulnerability in the face of climate change, and we have to be together to fight it.
Centrist parties across the European Union have suffered heavily in the bloc's parliamentary elections, with the far-right and Green parties making major gains. The far-right are set to take 74 seats, up from 37, while the Green Alliance is set to increase its number of seats from 50 to 75. The right-wing European People's Party is set to take the highest number of seats, but still recorded significant losses, dropping from 221 to 165. Voter turnout increased to over 50% across the bloc.
And secondly,
Bas Eickhout, one of the leading candidates for European Greens, expressed satisfaction with the results.
First of all, from our side, we want to thank all the voters coming out, but especially, of course, the voters who are very clearly asking for change for a new Europe, a Europe that is fighting climate change, a Europe that is looking for a green transition in a socially just way, and a Europe that is fighting for the rule of law and fighting to uphold the democracies in all the member states. And that is a Europe that has been voted for and where we as Greens have been performed even better than the polls have predicted. And that is really something that we are very thankful for, very grateful, and we see it also as a very important responsibility to deliver on that in the coming 5 years.
Our correspondent in Barcelona, Joan Ortiz, gives us more details on the Catalan elections.
¿Qué tal? Muy buenas, saludos desde Barcelona.
We're here in Barcelona, a city that has voted to be Republican and pro-independence, albeit with many nuances. Ernest Maragall, leading the left-wing pro-independence party Esquerra Republicana, has won the mayoral election. His party won the same number of seats in the Barcelona City Council as Barcelona en Comú, the left-wing party of the former mayor, Ada Colau, which is not pro-independence. However, Maragall's party had slightly more votes, and so by a tiny percentage, Maragall becomes mayor of Barcelona. The votes were quite evenly spread between a number of parties, which would have made it very difficult to make any pacts to give anyone a clear majority. So because of this, the party with the most votes and its leader will be elected to the mayor's position, and that is the party of Ernest Maragall. As for the European elections here in Catalonia, these were focused on the Catalan situation and the politicians who are in jail or in exile. In the end, several Catalan pro-independence leaders will have a seat in the European Parliament. Oriol Junqueras, who is currently in prison, was elected to occupy a seat in the EU Parliament if the courts don't prevent it. Carles Puigdemont and Antoni Comín also won seats in the EU Parliament. So there's an uncertain situation for them now. Will the EU institutions accept their immunity as members of the European Parliament? If they do, that could mean that the Catalan leaders will be able to go back to Spanish territory and the police and the courts will not be able to arrest them without the Spanish state publicly applying a policy totally opposed to the EU authorities.
We thank Joan Ortiz for that report. Moving on, at least 45 people have died after a boat sank in the Western Democratic Republic of Congo. The boat sank in Lake Main-Dombe on Saturday. According to officials, over 400 people were on board, with reports that about 200 passengers are still missing. Search and rescue operations on the lake could take between 2 and 3 weeks. 11 children were among those who died. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The death toll due to the earthquake which hit Peru on Sunday has risen to 2. A second victim was reported by the authorities on Monday. According to emergency services, a 15-year-old died due to a strong impact on their head in the province of Patas, while the other victim died during their sleep after a rock fell on their house. An 8-grade earthquake rocked the Peruvian Amazon early on Sunday and was felt in Colombia, Ecuador, and also Brazil. It's been 11 years since Peru signed the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. However, local organizations say the government has failed to honor these obligations.
Madeline spends most of her day taking care of her 23-year-old daughter, who is living with cerebral palsy. Although the law facilitates her to change or rearrange her work schedule, she was forced to resign as a nurse in the Trujillo hospital in the north of Peru.
They've only given us discounts and told us to find caretakers for our sons and daughters. They've also given us an ultimatum to choose between our jobs or our children.
And did you choose your daughter?
I chose my daughter. I'm a mother first, and if I have to sell things, cook for someone or wash their clothes and leave my profession behind to take care of my daughter, that is what I will do.
The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities says the relatives in charge of taking care of these people must have reasonable adjustment to their work and job schedules. However, this has never occurred.
Employers used to tell me, it's either you resign or we fire you. That's the kind of influence they have over us. And the state does not take into account the real needs of persons living with disabilities, the way they eat, how their therapy works, how we pay for their diapers, medicines, neurologists, psychiatrists, or pediatricians. We've just been abandoned.
According to the Ombudsman's office, state entities fail to fulfill these obligations under law, causing many families of persons with disabilities not to have access to proper jobs, condemning them to a life of poverty and indignation.
The authorities are totally aware of these issues. What surprises us is that they don't solve it. It's great that the Ombudsman continues fighting alongside mothers who have children with disabilities. Since the convention was signed, we started once again to inform the various authorities about our challenges. We hope to get an acceptable answer.
According to the last census in 2017, around 3 million Peruvians suffer from some kind of disability, 40% of which are serious conditions.
In Brazil, around 1,000 human rights activists and favela residents in Rio de Janeiro have taken to the streets to protest against police violence. Under the slogan, "Stop Killing Us," protesters gathered in Mapena Beach while a mass demonstration in support of President Jair Bolsonaro was happening simultaneously on a nearby beach. Bolsonaro supports the shoot-to-kill policy in violent neighborhoods like favelas. According to official figures, over 430 police killings took place in the first 3 months of 2019.
My feeling is anger, is sorrow and sadness. I'm here. My son will not come back. Nothing that I or someone else does will bring my son back. But I would like this police violence in the favela to stop so no other mother feels what I'm feeling.
Clashes at a prison in Brazil's Amazonas state have left 15 inmates dead. According to authorities, the clashes broke out on Sunday during visit hours. Most of the dead were stabbed with toothbrushes or strangled to death. The cause of the clashes are still being investigated. A riot at the same facility in January 2017 killed 56 inmates.
Around 11 a.m. an internal fight broke out in Pavilions 5 and 3, leading the warden to activate immediately the prison intervention group. The riot caused the death of 15 inmates. The prison intervention group's action was fundamental so we could maintain control. The incident started around 11 a.m. and by 11:40 it had been contained.
Meanwhile, in Venezuela, the families of inmates who died during a riot at a jail inside a police station have appealed to the government to investigate it. 29 inmates died during this riot in the town of Acarigua in the state of Portuguesa.
They blame those guys in there, but I need someone to explain to me, how is it possible that in a police station with so much security they have weapons and even grenades?
What happened here is a massacre of young boys, 18 to 25 years old, 29 men who were killed, and we want this not to go unpunished.
70,000 families in Paraguay have been displaced due to continuous flooding of the Paraguay River. Weeks of heavy rains caused rivers to overflow. According to the Department of Meteorology and Hydrology, water is nearing disaster level in the capital Asunción, reaching over 7.5 meters in some places. Many have remained in their flooded houses. It's more than 4.5 years since the disappearance of 43 students from a rural teacher training college in Ayotzinapa, Mexico. The relatives of the victims are once again mobilizing to demand truth and justice.
Exactly 56 months have passed since the 43 Ayotzinapa students disappeared. Time has passed, but the hope of their parents to see them come back, or at least to know what happened, remains intact. During this protest, the families demanded that the Attorney General appoint a special attorney for the case, as President Andrés Manuel López Obrador had promised at the beginning of his term.
No It is unbelievable or logical to wait so long. We have asked him to speed things up and call the attorney to appear before the commission to explain. That's why we don't think we will have to wait much longer.
Their desperation is palpable as they wait for results from the Truth Commission set up on December 3rd last year by presidential decree. Meeting after meeting, the parents have requested that members of the armed forces who might have been involved in the disappearance of their children be called to declare.
We have come to believe that the disappearance of our children was coordinated. They were present at the killing of 3 students. The Mexican army took pictures and videos. There are documents, but they aren't in the files. They are responsible and we are demanding they be investigated.
Those who have supported the families say that clearing up what happened would send a clear signal that change is possible in this country, where there are 40,000 disappeared people, according to official figures.
As long as this is not solved, things will get worse in this country or remain the same. I was thinking how surreal this all is, a country where 43 students can just disappear from one day to the next.
The relatives of the victims say it is essential that investigations speed up. In mid-June, the members of the Truth Commission will give an initial report on what has been achieved in the first 6 months of work.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fishermen in Bangladesh have protested against the government for imposing a 2-month fishing ban. The government imposed the ban last week in an effort to replenish depleted sea life. But protesters have submitted a memorandum demanding the ban be shortened to 1 month. However, as part of compensation measures, the government has announced it will provide free rice to badly affected fishermen. And police in Indonesia have arrested 6 suspects accused of plotting to assassinate state officials. A police spokesperson said the group were plotting to kill them during riots that broke out in Jakarta last week. Allegedly, the suspects received over $10,000 from an unidentified source as payment for the would-be killings. They have also been charged for being in possession of weapons, which carries a maximum penalty of life in prison.
On March 14, 2019, suspect HK received payment amounting to 150 million rupiah, and TJ received as much as 25 million rupiah from someone who we have identified. TJ was ordered to kill 2 national figures. I cannot say their names in public.
Malawi's President Peter Mutharika has been elected to a 2nd term in office with a narrow 38.5% of the vote. The result was announced on Monday after an injunction order by the country's high court was lifted. Opposition leader Lazarus Chakwera, who scooped 35.4% of the vote, had sought to delay the announcement due to concerns over voting irregularities. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has met the governors of the country's 19 northern states to discuss worsening security conditions. A faction of Boko Haram has become increasingly active in the northeast of the country, attacking civilian and military targets. Hundreds of thousands of people have fled their homes over the last decade because of these attacks. Meanwhile, in the northwest, kidnappings by armed groups have also become rampant. Authorities in Ghana have banned the export of some vegetables, including chili peppers and eggplants, over fears they are contaminated. The ban comes in the wake of a European Union directive to all countries to provide a report on the management of harmful bacteria. The Vegetable Producers and Exporters Association of Ghana has asked to postpone the ban, arguing it will affect the work of about 4,000 farmers. But authorities want to avoid new restrictions being imposed by the EU on Ghana, as the most recent of which were only lifted last year. Madagascar is choosing new members of parliament. Voters are electing about 150 lawmakers less than 6 months after Andry Rajoelina was elected president. According to Madagascar's constitution, the party with majority in the National Assembly will propose a prime minister who is then appointed by the head of state.
I hope that they will be true spokespersons for the people and that they will develop the constituencies for which they are responsible.
I no longer trust members of parliament if it's the same ones who will still be elected, because bad practices will continue.
The president of Comoros, Asali Assoumani, took oath 2 months after his re-election. Assoumani won by nearly 60% of the vote in the March polls, an outcome described as fraudulent by the opposition. Opposition challengers stayed away from the swearing-in ceremony, accusing the president of undermining democracy. During his speech in the capital, Moroni, Assoumani said he wanted to relaunch dialogue with opposition leaders next week.
What I'm expecting is precisely for them to institute a new change, a new method and policy that speaks to an entire political class and at the same time that is a dynamic, positive, social and economic approach.
More than 8,000 immigrants taken into custody in the United States were held in solitary confinement under both the Obama and Trump administrations. Thousands of documents covering a 5-year period revealed more than half were not for rule violations, with at least 6 of them committing suicide. A third of the people were segregated for mental illnesses, disabilities, or for what U.S. immigration said was safety reasons. One detainee was reportedly held in solitary confinement for 390 days. United States President Donald Trump has wrapped up his 4-day visit to Japan with a joint press conference with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. During the press conference, Trump and Abe discussed a number of issues, including Iran, trade with China, and the deadlocked talks between the U.S. and North Korea. Trump said that there is great respect between his country and North Korea.
I'm in no rush at all. The sanctions remain. We have our hostages back. We, as you know, are getting the remains, continuing to get the remains. A lot of good things are happening. And very importantly, there's been no nuclear testing for 2 years. I looked at a chart the other day. During the past administration, there were many numbers that were very high, like 10 and 12 and 18, having to do with missile launches and nuclear testing. And for the last 2 years on the bottom, it had 0 and 0. So I am very happy with the way it's going, and intelligent people agree with me.
And Trump also spoke about the trade negotiations with China and said that Washington was not ready to make a deal with Beijing, but he expected one in the future.
As far as China is concerned, they want to make a deal. I think they probably wish they made the deal that they had on the table before they tried to renegotiate it. They would like to make a deal. We're not ready to make a deal, and we're taking in tens of billions of dollars of tariffs, and that number could go up very, very substantially, very easily. But I think sometime in the future, China and the United States will absolutely have a great trade deal, and we look forward to that.
Meanwhile, the Chinese government has said any future trade talks with the United States must be based on mutual respect. The spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that China remains hopeful that any differences can be resolved through negotiations.
We always believe that, first, any differences between any two countries should of course be resolved through friendly negotiations and consultations. This also applies to resolving economic and trade differences between China and the United States. Second, we have always insisted on consultations between China and the United States, including economic and trade consultations.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.